he dreamed that he looked into a mirror and saw the face of a devil instead of his own. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche, 1844 to 1900, was a German philosopher, cultural critic and philologist whose work has exerted a profound influence on modern intellectual history. He began his career as a classical philologist before turning to philosophy. He became the youngest person ever to hold the chair of the University of Basel in 1869 at the age of 24. Nietzsche resigned in 1879 due to health problems that plagued him most of his life. He completed much of his core writing in the following decade. In 1889, at age 45, he suffered a collapse and afterward a complete loss of his mental faculties, with paralysis and probably vascular dementia. He lived his remaining years in the care of his mother, until her death in 1897, and then with his sister Elisabeth Forster Nietzsche. Nietzsche died in 1900, after many strokes and pneumonia. Now, let's get started. Zarathustra was a hermit who has lived 10 years on a mountain with his two companions, an eagle and a serpent. One morning, inspired by the sun, which was happy only when it shines upon others, Zarathustra decided to return to the world and share his wisdom. Upon descending the mountain, he encountered a saint living in a forest, who spent his days praising God. Zarathustra marveled that the saint had not yet heard that God is dead. Arriving at the nearest town, Zarathustra addressed a crowd which had gathered to watch a tightrope walker. He told them that mankind's goal must be to create something superior to itself, a new type of human, the übermensch. All men, he said, must be prepared to will their own destruction in order to bring the übermensch into being. Explanation: Übermensch is affirmative to his life and has a spirit of self-advancement, an unconquerable spirit and strong will. Human being is a single rope bridged between animal and übermensch. It's danger for them to go forward, stay there, look back and be petrified, too. The crowd greeted this speech with scorn and mockery, and meanwhile the tightrope show began. When the rope dancer was halfway across, a clown came up behind him, urging him to get out of the way. The clown then leapt over the rope dancer, causing the latter to fall to his death. The crowd scattered. Zarathustra took the corpse of the rope dancer on his shoulders, carried it into the forest, and laid it in a hollow tree. He decided that from this point on, he would no longer attempt to speak to the masses, but only to a few chosen disciples. There followed a series of discourses in which Zarathustra overturned many of the precepts of Christian morality. He gathered a group of disciples, but ultimately abandoned them, saying that he will not return until they have disowned him. Zarathustra retired to his mountain cave, and several years passed by. One night, he dreamed that he looked into a mirror and saw the face of a devil instead of his own. He took this as a sign that his doctrines were being distorted by his enemies, and joyfully descended the mountain to recover his lost disciples. More discourses followed, which continued to develop the themes of the death of God and the rise of the Übermensch, and also introduced the concept of the will to power. There were hints, however, that Zarathustra was holding something back. A series of dreams and visions prompted him to reveal this secret teaching, but he couldn't bring himself to do so. He withdrew from his disciples once more, in order to perfect himself. While journeying home, Zarathustra was waylaid by the spirit of gravity, a dwarf-like creature which clung to his back and whispered taunts into his ear. Zarathustra at first became despondent, but then took courage. He challenged the spirit to hear the abysmal thought, which he had so far refrained from speaking. This was the doctrine of eternal recurrence. Time, said Zarathustra, is infinite, stretching both forward and backward into eternity. This means that everything that happens now must have happened before, and that every moment must continue to repeat itself eternally. As he spoke, Zarathustra heard a dog howl in terror, and then he saw a new vision, a shepherd choking on a black serpent which had crept into his throat. At Zarathustra's urging, the shepherd bit the serpent's head off and spit it out. In that moment, the shepherd was transformed into a laughing, radiant being, something greater than human. Explanation: the black serpent represents nihilism. Nietzsche says that human being needs to overcome nihilism when we acquires an eternal recurrence. If there are two options, a negative and unhappy life eternally or a positive and happy life forever, we must choose the latter. When we choose the latter, we would try to live our life which we can allow to repeat forever. Eternal recurrence is a way of thinking so that we can exist on affirmatively in the world where God is dead. If we can be affirmative to the moment we live, we can live affirmatively toward the future without regretting the past. Zarathustra continued his journey, delivering more discourses inspired by his observations. Arriving at his mountain cave, he remained there for some time. Reflecting on his mission, he was disgusted at humanity's pettiness, and despaired at the thought of the eternal recurrence of such an insignificant race. Eventually, however, he discovered his own longing for eternity, and sang a song in celebration of eternal return. Zarathustra began to grow old as he remained secluded in his cave. One day, he was visited by a soothsayer, who said that he had come to tempt Zarathustra to his final sin. Compassion, Mitleiden, which can also be translated, pity. A loud cry of distress was heard, and the soothsayer told Zarathustra that the higher man was calling to him. Zarathustra was alarmed, and rushed to the aid of the higher man. Searching through his domain for the person who had uttered the cry for help, Zarathustra encountered a series of characters representative of various aspects of humanity. He engaged each of them in conversation, and ended by inviting each one to await his return in his cave. After a day's search, however, he was unable to find the higher man. Returning home, he heard the cry of distress once more, now coming from inside his own cave. He realized that all the people he had spoken to that day were collectively the higher man. Welcoming them to his home, he nevertheless told them that they were not the men he had been waiting for, they were only the precursors of the übermensch. Zarathustra hosted a supper for his guests, which was enlivened by songs and arguments, and ended in the facetious worship of a donkey. The higher men thanked Zarathustra for relieving them of their distress and teaching them to be content with life. The following morning, outside his cave, Zarathustra encountered a lion and a flock of doves, which he interpreted as a sign that those whom he called his children were near. As the higher men emerged from the cave, the lion roared at them, causing them to cry out and flee. Their cry reminded Zarathustra of the soothsayer's prediction that he would be tempted into feeling compassion for the higher man. Compassion is not for other people's benefit. He declared that this was over, and that from this time forward he would think of nothing but his work.
Please subscribe to my channel. We're gonna show you world masterpieces in about 15 minutes with manga. Manga is Japanese-style comics that is easy for everyone to understand. We're sure that you can grasp the context shortly.
See you next time.